Prairie Bend, Kansas, in the Flint Hills honey country along the Santa Fe Spur, the spring of 1885. The letter that Elias Warder mailed east had asked for a wife the way a careful man orders seed. Sensible, it said, thrifty, church-going, no debts, plain in her wants. And above all, twice underlined so the ink had feathered, no bees and no wild schemes. Elias Warder had kept ledgers on 9 lonely Novembers, which is a specific arithmetic a man does with a lamp turned low so that he cannot quite see the empty second chair. What he did not know, folding that letter into its envelope, was that the woman who would answer it had been queen of her father's beard since she was 10 years old, and considered a man who feared bees to be a man who had simply never once tasted what patience makes. This is the story of how a man who ordered a wife with no wild schemes came to keep the sweetest fortune in the Flint Hills, and how 80 boxes of stinging bees his own letter had forbidden sold a whole cheated county its honey back at the honest price. Elias was a decent man, and decency on the frontier is largely arithmetic. He had a good quarter section, a sound barn, a widower's tidy grief, and an orchard he had planted the first spring and that had never in 6 years set enough fruit to fill a bushel basket. He wrote his specifications as he did everything else, in a straight column, because a column of wants cannot leave a man, and a person can. But 3 lines near the bottom had escaped the column. He had written, without meaning to, that the orchard faced the morning and gave nothing, and that a house is quiet in a way that acres are not, and that he would be grateful for company that did not need to be explained. Ada Fenwick, 26 years old, read those 3 lines 4 times. She was an Ohio bee master's daughter, raised inside the movable frame trade her father had learned from the Langstroth men, and she kept his honey notebook as other women kept a Bible. She could read a lie out of any jar of honey ever poured. She answered the sensible letter, and she did not mention the 80 stands of Italian bees she meant to bring, because some truths are better hived than written. She stepped off the train at Prairie Bend and did not ask after the house. She did not ask after the acres or the barn. She looked at Elias Warder over the steam and asked which way his orchard faced, and whether the clover ran clear down to the creek. Elias, who had rehearsed a paragraph, began to read her back his own specifications. The church-going, and the no debts, and the no wild schemes, as though a marriage were in order to be confirmed. He got as far as the underlined part. That was when the crate on the freight platform jarred loose in the unloading, sprang its lid, and a full stand of bees came up off the boards in one rising note like a struck chord. Men scattered. A drummer dropped his sample case. Elias stopped mid-sentence with the letter still lifted, and Ada Fenwick set down her bag, took up a straw skep and a fistful of smoke, and had the whole loose swarm gathered, hived, and humming quiet in the shade of the water tank before he had found his place on the page again. "You wrote no wild schemes," she said, brushing a bee from her wrist as though it were a crumb. "I'll not argue the word. But before the house, Mr. Warder, we'll settle terms." The terms were these, and she gave them plain. "The beard is mine to work," she said, "and every pound it makes is mine to sell. You will never burn a hive to quiet a nervous neighbor, and I keep the right to say no to a thing without owing you or anyone the reason for it. That is a good many conditions," Elias said, "for a woman who has been in Kansas the better part of an hour. It is one condition," she said, "written 3 ways. Do we agree, Mr. Warder, or do I recrate my bees?" Elias looked a long moment at the woman who had just outworked a panic he had run from. "We agree," he said, and found, to his own surprise, that he meant it. The first honey flow taught him the rest. She requeened the weak colonies and stacked the supers high. And in June a thing happened that the almanac could not have promised him. His morning orchard, barren 6 years running, set its heaviest fruit in living memory, because 40,000 of her forbidden bees had worked the bloom that no honest wind ever finished. Elias stood under branches bent to breaking and did not say the tender thing, because he never could. Instead, he built her a honey house to the drawing she left on the table, and he set its wide door to face the sun, and when she saw it, he let her believe the sun-facing door had been his own idea. She let him believe she believed it. That is a kind of marriage. The town named her the Mad Bee Bride, and were pleased with themselves for it. Silas Thorne laughed loudest. A commission peddler who worked the county from a wagon hung with bright tin pails, selling honey by the pound and buying it cheaper. He tipped his hat to her bees and told the feed store that stinging livestock was the one crop in Kansas a sensible husband would set a match to. Elias smoked the hives for her at dusk, so her hand stayed free of the veil, and some mornings she left a cut comb warming on his windowsill, and neither of them called that anything at all. Then, in the drift toward autumn, the price broke. Thorne had come back down the spur with a wagon of cheap glucose syrup dressed and colored to pass for honey, and squares of counterfeit comb pressed pale in a factory mold, and he sold it under the honest price until no keeper in the county could move a jar. Worse than the cutting was the panic he seeded at the feed store. He swore the comb itself was fake now, all of it, molded by the barrel in Eastern factories, so that no buyer could trust a real one, and no buyer should pay for one. Frightened farmers began to sell him their true crop for pennies, rather than be caught holding a thing the county had decided was worthless. And a neighbor, meaning it half in fun, told Elias that his wife had raised the only crop in Kansas nobody alive would buy. Elias came home cold with it. "I have to ask you a thing," he said, "and I will only ask it the once. Did you answer my letter for a husband? Or did you answer it for a place to keep your bees, and take the husband because he came with the acres?" Ada set down her veil. "You wrote 3 honest lines about a barren orchard," she said, "and now you want me to answer a dishonest question. I will not. Ask me again when you have remembered which one of us has never lied to you." And she went out to the honey house, and the acres and the house stayed quiet between them for the better part of a week. The county harvest fair was set to name Silas Thorne the honest dealer of the district, and let him buy the whole county crop at his own gouging figure. Ada Fenwick asked the fair board for 1 table and a kettle of hot water. They gave her both, mostly to be rid of her. She set his pail jar beside her own on the boards where the Grange could see, and she began to read his lies out loud. "Honey candies," she said. "True honey grows fine and white and grainy as the frost comes on every jar of it, because that is what the flower's sugar does. His has stood 2 months and stays a thin, clear syrup, and it will stay syrup till judgment, because it is corn glucose, and glucose has never granulated in the history of the world." Then she struck a wax match to a shaving of her own comb, and it burned clean with the low, sweet smell of beeswax that every soul at that fence had known since childhood. She held the flame to a corner of his, and it slumped and smeared and stank because it was paraffin. And last she laid his molded square open with a knife. A hive-built comb carries a midrib the bees raise down the center, and no two cells run the same depth, because 40,000 bees never once agreed on anything. Look at his. Every wall the same, every cell stamped one depth. That is a mold, gentlemen. Real comb is built by bees who never learned how to lie. It takes a man with a mold to teach the wax. The Grange looked and smelled and understood. Thorne's contract was voided before the water in the kettle had gone cold. Then Elias Warder, who could never say the tender thing, found he could say this one. He stood up in front of the men who had laughed and told them his order had asked for a wife with no wild schemes, and that the one wild scheme he got had walked past every last one of them and handed the county back its honest year at the fair price, which was a good deal more than the honest dealer had ever thought to offer them. She did not ruin Silas Thorne. He had cut a little true honey into his glucose to carry the color, and she bought that real stock off him at fair weight, so the books of every customer he had cheated could be squared. She sent a full calm up to the parsonage for nothing, and she let him keep his team and drive out of the county on his own wheels, corrected and not destroyed, which the frost would have to be enough of a sentence. That night Elias asked her, at last, why she had answered a stranger's cold specifications at all. Ada said that a man who could write 3 honest lines about a barren orchard without once dressing them up to look better was a man whose bees a woman could trust, and that she had known the rest would follow as fruit follows the bloom. They married in November of 1885. Over the honey house door they hung a board that read, in her hand, Prairie Bend Comb, built by bees and not by molds, and the Warder apiary shipped the county's honey for 30 years after. He died in 1922 and she in 1930, and they lie side by side on the rise above the orchard. The bees still work. He had ordered a sensible wife and forbidden every scheme outright, because schemes had always cost him. The one scheme he got taught the whole county the only arithmetic that ever holds. Sweetness cannot be faked past the first frost, and neither, it turns out, can a marriage. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. What was the moment you knew Ada was never once going to be what he ordered? And when you have decided, I have another story waiting for you right here.